Okay, Google, I'm not trying to talk to you. Well, hey girl, hey! Here at my crash pad, which is where I'm filming in our actual room. This is the bed situation behind us, or behind me. And hopefully lighting is okay. I'm trying to get some window light. It's very gloomy right now. It's been raining for like 2 days. Yeah, on this video I'm going to do another question and answer series. I've got about 4 or 5 questions that I'm going to answer. Some are just simple, easy to answer questions, and some are a little more in detail. So if you are interested in that, hang in there. Episode number 2. I got a lot of good feedback from episode number 1, and so I'm going to go episode 2, and I have about 4 or 5 questions. Not going to do too many because then it just gets too long and I ramble. So, so we're going to start out with some easy questions first. I was asked, how tall do you need to be, and is 5'0" too short? So here's my answer. Easy answer. No, it's not too short. You have to be able to reach up and close overhead bins. Now, in my particular company, 5'0" is like the minimum. They make you take your shoes off and they measure you, and you cannot be shorter than 5'0", and you cannot be taller than, I want to say 6 feet, but it might be 6'1", because those planes are small. The regional planes are small. So you have to be able to stand up, obviously. So that is the answer on the height. So if you can, I know not a lot of other airlines, they make you do a reach test. So you have to be able to reach up and, because you know, if you fly on a mainline plane, those overhead bins are a little taller. But on the regionals, they're a little easier to close. Okay, question number 2. I remember now. Question number 2 is, where do you sleep when you're not at home and when you are not at your crash pad? Good question. So when I get called for a trip, or I get a trip placed on my schedule and it has an overnight, so say I'm going to be flying to Tucson, okay, so I'm going to be overnighting in Tucson. The company has hotels set up for us. They pay for them. They are part of our business expenses. So we're all set. We just show up at the hotel. They usually have us already booked in. Usually. Now sometimes this gets a little crazy. We had one, I tell you a quick story. We had one kind of last minute trip that we had to, I'm blanking. We had a last minute trip that we had to ferry a flight to Nashville because their plane had broken. So basically what that means is we take an empty airplane to the city. So we went to Nashville in an empty airplane, pilot, first officer, and 2 flight attendants. And then when we get there, all the passengers that are stranded because their plane broke, they get in our plane and we take them to their destination. So we actually picked them up, we picked them up in Boston, and then we took them to Nashville. So that was supposed to be our overnight in Nashville, and then we were supposed to work another flight from Nashville back to Detroit. That was when I was based in Detroit. Well, when we got to Nashville, it was very late. It was probably, I think it was around midnight, maybe 12:30. And there were no hotels. There was some big event going on, which I think in Nashville is like every day. There were no hotels, and there were actually other crews sitting in the airport waiting because they didn't have hotels either. So while they were searching, talking to crew support, trying to get us a hotel, we realized that there were no rooms actually in Nashville, and so they drove us, I believe it was like an hour and a half away. It might have been 2 hours, I don't remember. So we did not end up getting to our actual hotel, which was 2 hours away from where we were in Nashville, where we landed, and we stayed the night. So we ended up not working the flight in the morning because we have to have a minimum rest after we work. So we're still considered on duty, and so we did not get our minimum rest. We were supposed to fly out at like 7:30 or something, and we didn't get to our hotel till like 2:30. So obviously that was not going to be enough rest. So we got our rest, and then they just deadheaded us back to Detroit, which means we just flew as passengers on a flight back. We did not have to work. So that sometimes that happens, but there will always be something set up, or at least they will make something happen for you. So that's where we sleep when we're on a trip, when we're working. And question number 3, kind of 3 and 4 go together. So there was a question about whether or not you need to be financially set up before you become a flight attendant. So this answer is a little bit convoluted because everybody's a little bit different in a little bit different situation. So my situation was quite different in that my husband and I were financially stable-ish. I mean, you know, we're paying for kids to go to college and whatnot, but we pretty much were okay financially with or without my money. So a lot of times the money I brought in was kind of like extras, like travel or other things that came up. So it was kind of like almost like emergency fund. And so for us, me getting this job was more about the travel benefits and being able to fly rather than the paycheck. Now, obviously I'm going to do something that gives me a paycheck because I do need funds for certain things. Like we bought a new car right before I got this job, so I had to pay for my car. So what I would say is someone in a situation where you have a stable financial foundation already, like you have a significant other that basically pays the bills and takes care of everything, then you could get this job and not be too concerned with how much money you make in the beginning. Now, there are expenses. So this was kind of like a second part of the question. There are expenses. So yes, we pay for our mortgage, plus I pay for my crash pad. So, I mean, the crash pad is not expensive. It's only $220 a month. It's not that way everywhere, but here it is. So it's not that bad, but obviously if you are a single person on your own, you don't want to be paying 2 rents. So most single people that I know move to where they are based, and they live in crash pads, but they live there essentially. So some crash pads have rules though that you can't stay more than a certain number of nights, so you have to be careful with that. So if you are single and you don't have someone else's income to rely upon, you do need to keep that in consideration. Like, am I willing to move? Which is why a lot of times when you apply and you interview with these companies, they will ask you, are you willing to relocate? A, because they want you to be committed to wherever they want to base you, and B, because commuting is so stressful. If you think you're going to commute or you want to commute, you really need to think this through, because it can be super stressful. For example, I know someone who was commuting and they only gave themselves 2 options to get back to their base, and both of those filled up. And you can get to the airport and think you're going to commute in on a wide open flight, and then all of a sudden something happens, like another flight cancels and everybody moves to that flight. So then suddenly a person like me, or someone like that's been hired, you know, not that long ago, their seniority, they just move down the list, so they don't really get priority. So 2 flights bumped, no other flights out that night, so they ended up taking another flight to a city, at least was moving in the right direction, but from that city to their base ended up being 2 hours past their call time. Now, thankfully, they didn't get a call, so it was okay. But had they gotten called, could have potentially been a bad situation, like probably lost their job. So it's tricky. You got to be really careful, especially different companies have different probationary periods. My company is a 1-year probationary period, and there's a very little wiggle room. So you want to be super careful with commuting and trying to fly standby and getting back and forth. Now, I've been super lucky. I've only had a few little snafus, but I always make sure I have lots of options and give myself plenty of cushion. So, and sometimes it falls apart and you got to scramble. Like I had to drive a rental car when I was based in Detroit. I had to drive a rental car from, I think it was Flint, Michigan to Detroit, because I could not get a flight out of Minneapolis directly to Detroit. I had to just take anything that got me close enough, and then I had to rent a car and drive. So sometimes that happens, and so there's another expense that you got to think about. So if you are planning or trying to or you want to apply and you are going if you are trying to get this job and you're planning financially, I really recommend, if you are on your own, to try and save.